You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with the healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment.
Well, welcome back to the Doc Lounge podcast, where we go beyond the white coat and dive into bold ideas transforming healthcare and the human experience. I'm your host, Stacey Doyle, and today's guest is a true disruptor in the world of mental health and behavioral science. Joining me is Bizzie Gold, a trailblazer in neuroscience-backed emotional rewiring and the creator of Break Method, a revolutionary system that's shaking up traditional therapy. Over the last 11 years, Bizzie has mapped tens of thousands of data sets, uncovering a groundbreaking insight. Our patterns of self-deception are not random. They're predictable, diagnosable, and most importantly, rewirable. She's also the author of the upcoming book, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar, a provocative title for an even more provocative mission, helping people escape the subconscious traps that fuel sabotage and stall transformation. Whether you're a healthcare leader, physician, or someone striving for personal breakthrough, this conversation will give you a whole new lens on the science of behavior and why self-awareness might be overrated. So let's dive in. We're so excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome, Bizzie.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I know you've said that self-deception follows predictable patterns and can be, rewired without relying on, a client's self-awareness. So that's really a radical shift from traditional therapy. Tell us more about how you discovered this.
It's been roughly 11 years that I've been working in the field with clients of all various backgrounds. I think this is important because anyone who's ever studied any sort of data sets or statistics, if you're working with just one group that has too much in common, it's hard to really turn a hypothesis into a conclusion. So I've been fortunate enough to have been able to work with so many different demographics, from children all the way up to 70s and 80s, incarcerated populations, teens living in inpatient residential programs, struggling with suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, etc. So I've gotten to work with so many different demographics and, of course, track all of their historical data to prove that as much as we really want to believe that we are unique individuals, we really, as human beings, only have roughly 5 operating systems in how our brain actually perceives reality. And these are a direct byproduct of our early childhood inputs. And I think one of the things that I found the most interesting, because like you said, this is very antagonistic to the mental health paradigm that we find ourselves in today, which is very reliant on client self-reporting, narrative-based discussions. Being able to ask your client a question like, how is your relationship with your mom? Right? There's so many different gray, nuanced areas to that. What mood is that person in that day? For example, if I asked you a question about that when you were 17, you might have given me one answer. Maybe even just 3 weeks later, if you were near your menstrual cycle, you might have given me a radically different answer. So the data is then too malleable. It's not concrete. What we've found is that actually the concrete data, like at what age did your parents get divorced? Was there any religion present in your home? How many children were there? Where were you in the birth order? Things like this that aren't nuanced. They don't really change based on your emotions. You know how many siblings you had. What we've been able to distill is that if you track 200 specific historical data points and you aggregate those answer patterns, you can accurately place every single person into these 5 different brain pattern types. And from within that, we also track 9 distinct markers that include 3 markers that help us understand someone's thought process in early, transitional, and late stages, how these then in turn are going to elicit a chemical response in the body that's experienced like an emotional response, and then also 4 distinct behavior markers that again show us early stage behavior, transitional behavior, and late stage behavior. This all functions in a system. So if you were to imagine what we often describe as a person's personality or even cultural traits of things like how we were raised, these essentially are all byproducts of how this system is experienced by another person, but they're not really pinpointing one piece of it. We can essentially tell you, oh, the reason that this person's personality is being experienced in this way is because they have these 4 markers in this specific order. And essentially, we don't need a client to be able to have an accurate depiction of their life. We don't We don't need them to be able to supply us with more qualitative details. We simply need them to put 20 minutes into filling out this historical data assessment, and we're able to predict all of their behaviors, secrets that they keep, relationship problems that they're likely to have. And by the time we're running this information down to either the client or the care provider, there's usually a little bit of fear there because it challenges our paradigm so much that somebody wouldn't think it's possible, and yet the person's sitting there right there and they're reading you a script of exactly who you are, how you think, what faults you may, be aware of in yourself, what fights you tend to get in, etc. So it feels very exposing, but I think more than it feels exposing, it confounds our entire paradigm of what we've been led to believe about mental health. And I think we've effectively proven that the entire narrative model is not just outdated, but it's ineffective at actually getting to the root cause.
Well, I love that. That was an amazing summary. It makes me curious. How did you decide to take this approach? What made you think, okay, let me lean on data points, and obviously, kind of looking at it from a completely different lens?
I think, like many people who have stumbled upon inventions over the millennia, you often don't know what you're looking for. You're following breadcrumbs, and then you start to see how certain breadcrumbs are interconnected. And that's certainly been the case for me over 11 years. I don't think I knew what I was building 11 years ago. In fact, it really wasn't until about 2022 that I feel like I finally understood how all the breadcrumbs that I'd been following were interconnected and did work in this system. And I think that when somebody decides they want to create something and it's like they have the idea, oftentimes that's tied to financial endeavors, right? Like, I want to do this because I want to make X amount of dollars, or I want to do this that I'm regarded as an expert. And I think sometimes it can shift or distort how we're actually building that product because we've already decided what we want to build. So it's like our cognitive bias is already prevalent in the experience of bringing whatever that thing is through into our physical world. I went about it a very different way. I was very much called to this profession and had been in a variety of different ways been navigating my way toward this profession since I was 19 when I started in hypnotherapy. I found a lot of success in hypnotherapy, but I eventually started to find myself in a place where, looking back on it, I feel like I had this amazing 5-year container to get to interface with the subconscious and really start to understand whether it's person A, B, C, D, E, or F. The subconscious has these specific tells linguistically. And that was, I think, one of the first things that I started to notice even back then when I was, late teens, early 20s. So I think the spark was always there. And if I go back to my earliest years as a child, I think the spark was always there. I grew up with a mother that had borderline personality disorder. And if anyone's ever been raised in an environment like that, where there's just a perpetual gaslighting state, one of your trauma reflexes is that you have to become acutely aware in the present moment because you know that someone's going to weaponize something that will make you question yourself. So you end up becoming acutely aware of your surroundings. I ended up developing a photographic memory, whether that was something that was likely occurring innately and then this just made it get more pronounced. That's a possibility because certainly my youngest child has a photographic memory as well. But nonetheless, you end up learning how to catalog all these details. You start to learn how to scan facial expressions so that you can try, like an algorithm, to predict how crazy is today going to go, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, based on the way mom's moving her eyebrow or the way she's shuffling around the kitchen, how do I have to try to accommodate her mood so that I stay out of dodge? So I think even if I go back then, I've always been aware of patterns. That was my trauma response from a young age. So if you then kind of take this perfect blend of already scanning for patterns, then finding my way into this profession, interfacing with a variety of different people's subconscious and the things that were hidden from them consciously, where they would come out of hypnotherapy and I would play back their recording with them and we would parse through the information. And to watch somebody, even at age 19, 20, when I'm sitting there as a professional leading these sessions, to watch somebody be so shocked and awed that those words had come out of their mouth and it was completely counter to what they thought they believed about themselves, what they thought was true, and it really was them hearing it for the first time, that let me know very clearly there's something here. And there's something here that needs to be understood. At the beginning of my book, I open with a story about being 13 years old watching the movie Fight Club for the first time. Have you ever seen Fight Club?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. So at the very last scene where you finally have this epiphany, oh my gosh, these two characters are actually one person. This was a total paradigm shift for me because it was the first moment in my life that I actually felt empathy for my mom. Because up to this point, I think to some extent I felt like she was messing with me on purpose and that she knew what she was doing, but she was doing it anyways. And this was my first realization that she was under self-deception and she had no idea what she was doing, and she actually really believed these sort of distorted realities that she was talking to me about, even when my sister and I and all people would be like, that didn't happen, what are you talking about? So for lack of a better word, up until 13 I kind of just felt like I was being punked for 13 years, you know. So this was the first moment where I realized, no, self-deception is a real thing. And I feel like that was the day that I kind of, set my flag on this territory of what is self-deception. Why do some people not notice it? Why can't they tell the line between emotionally driven distortion versus objective reality? And I set out on a mission to get the answer to that question. And I think I went on this kind of meandering journey along the way, but ultimately found myself working with clients one-on-one and working at it in this way of obviously addressing kind of these underlying distortions that our subconscious will create from early childhood programming. And eventually, just from moving through such a large client load, I started to naturally see, like a matrix problem, what all these different clients had in common. So I think even early on, starting maybe in like 2014 to 2017, I was already in my mind kind of organizing these algorithmic rules. And then as my practice started to grow, my influx of clients started to grow. So then I was able to go from, like a 250 person set to now 15,000 client records, where now once you think you see a pattern and you make that bigger, if that pattern is based in truth, you're going to see that pattern grow exponentially, which is certainly what I found when I started to have access to more incoming client data. And eventually, from following these breadcrumbs in these different parts of the system, which all kind of came to me in different phases, eventually in 2022, I was holding my youngest son, giving him a bottle. He was probably 2.5 months old. And I remember just kind of drifting off while my baby was eating. And all of a sudden, it literally was like I just saw it. It was like I understood how each of these pieces functioned separately. And it was like I literally just saw them all come together. And I went to my husband. I'm like, honey, you have to take the baby. I need to go to my computer right away. So I go to my computer and I start putting the schematic together. And it really was like if you were building an engine, it's like you have this part of the engine, this cog, like this carburetor, whatever. And then all of a sudden you see how the whole engine comes together. So in that moment, literally in one spark, it was like I just saw how the whole schematic came together. And as luck, chance, or destiny would have it, it was in that same year that I had a client come through my program where we had an immediate rough start. And he's a PhD Orthodox Jew, like very, very by the book. And he really didn't like what I told him about his brain pattern type on the very first session. He was extremely triggered by it. And although he kind of took the information when I told it to him, he went around behind my back and went to our, customer service department, was like, I want a refund. This whole thing is BS. She couldn't possibly know all these things about me. She had to scrape data on the internet, like went like very like high level mistrusting of how I got to this information. All in all, eventually I talked her through how to talk to this person. I was like, hey, go back to his brain pattern map. He's literally doing the exact things that I mapped out to him yesterday. So hold your ground to see how this turns around. Long story short, he emails me and he's like, if you'll still have me, I would very much love to still stay a client. I think I just like the mathematician in me does not understand how this is possible. And I'm like, okay, I get that. So we carry on roughly one more session. Then he lets me know like, hey, I do this for a living. Like, this is what I do with data. I work in tech. This is so accurate that yes, it triggered me, but this is the future of mental health and I want to build this for you. So basically since then to now, we've had, just this massive tech company come on board to actually take the algorithm that I had created and turn it into a tech platform with all the bells and whistles and the things that now doctors can use, administrators can use at an intake process, so that we can essentially give you all of the most relevant information you as a doctor would need as a client to understand what interventions will work at what time. Where's your client likely to self-sabotage? Where might your client say, sounds like a good idea, and then completely ignore every piece of advice you gave them? So we can help you anticipate how to deal with that effectively with your client so that you're not waiting until something goes wrong and then having to clean up a mess. So you're able to effectively anticipate messes before they happen and adapt whatever your clinical process is to the unique needs, both emotionally and behaviorally, of your client to make sure that you have successful outcomes. So he's been my business partner since 2022. And now we have a 12-person team that's spread out from El Segundo to India and New York and everything in between.
How amazing. I love that story, and it kind of shows really the true effectiveness and kind of breakthroughness that it had with him. And it sounds like your superpower is definitely, patterns, and like you're saying, piecing all of this experience and the breadcrumbs that you've had throughout your career together. Tell me, so if we obviously have psychiatrists and we have MPs and PAs, in psychiatry, listening, how could they effectively incorporate this in their practice setting?
So there's two different pathways to incorporate this into your practice. One would be to actually become certified so that you understand the whole diagnostic methodology, how to read the diagnostics, and then also obviously be able to license the technology for your own practice. It's best input on just the diagnostic side. Obviously, at the intake process, you would want to know this information about the client, in particular with psychiatry or psychology, before you build rapport with the client, because you don't want to be primed to read the diagnostic results in a specific way. You want to be able to scan the diagnostic results clean without any subjectivity or bias. Then you would kind of take that framework into all the sessions you would do with your client. So typically best integrated in that first step. Also, we do train and certify therapists. I work with a lot of chiropractic neurologists. I work with a lot of naturopaths, you name it, addiction medicine, family medicine, where they want to understand the entire system. So instead of just, I want to be certified to integrate the technology platform and scan a diagnostic, they actually want to understand what the intervention process is as well. Because our break method is broken into two halves. So there's the brain pattern mapping side, which is the diagnostic half. The other half is, okay, now that we know the what, how are we going to rewire the whole system? And what is the order of rewiring and what does that process look like? So that's what we call in break method behavior strategy. The behavior strategy component of the training is significantly longer. I've seen practitioners get through the brain pattern mapping diagnostic certification in roughly 3 to 4 months. But the behavior strategy component, if you're going to do both, it typically is extending out your learning process with us from 6 to 9 months, depending on how quickly you move through practicum clients. You also, instead of getting certified, you can also just integrate the technology platform and have our team provide you with the insights. So instead of actually having someone on your team that understands how to do the whole diagnostic process on their own, we also have certain companies that contract with us. So we provide them the insights, but they don't actually have to learn how to do the entire diagnostic process itself. And this is also something that's utilized even in the medical space for recruiting. There are certain roles within a company or organization that need to have certain brain pattern types, where if you put, let's say someone's resume looks good, they interview really well. I think we've all been there. Someone can have a great resume, a great interview, and then they absolutely crash and burn as soon as they're into your organization. That's something that we also work with too on the corporate strategy side, is integrating brain pattern mapping into the recruiting pipeline, or also using brain pattern mapping for your entire organization so that we can help you understand where there are certain strengths within the organization and where there are likely team dynamic breakdowns because of mismatched brain pattern types.
Fascinating applications for this method. So I thank you for breaking that down. And it sounds like a lot of our listeners, family practice, addiction medicine, psychologists, psychiatrists could, utilize this. So we'll let you tell us at the end how they can, get more information and get potentially onboarded with the break method. Now, I wanted to switch gears real here quickly to your upcoming book is titled, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. I love that. Love that's very, it gets your mind going. What is one of the biggest lies our brains tell us?
Well, it came out on June 3rd, which is very exciting. So the book is right here. It's not a short read, so everyone prepare, strap in. It's actually right now currently number one in cognitive neuropsychology
Yeah.
and mental emotional health, which is very exciting.
Congrats.
I think that question is possibly a little bit too general. So this is what I will say. Every single brain pattern type has their unique flavor, so to speak, of self-deception. So one of the things that both brain pattern mapping and the book does is it helps you understand, based on your brain pattern type, where are your unique self-deceptive tendencies. So if you and I had two different brain pattern types, I can explain for sure what mine would be. Uh, my brain pattern type makes me lack nearly all self-preservation because that was something that I had to let go of as a way to keep people around me placated or de-escalated. So that's something that obviously I've had to learn as I've aged and done some of the rewiring process, is like, oh, I have to make this decision for myself, because if I keep doing this for everybody else, eventually I'm going to crash and burn, whether it's through my health or eventually I, explode and let off frustration that I didn't want to let off. So one of my kind of top tier self-deceptive tendencies is I'll figure it out, or even worse, I'll figure it out later. I probably will, right? This is one of my personal problems, is I probably will, but at the expense of what? Because I can't figure everything out, but somehow my brain, through positive self-deception, believes that I somehow can figure everything out. But again, there's going to be a deficit there. For others, their core wounding is much more centered around safety. I don't have that wound. So to say that, this one self-deceptive tendency would kind of span the whole population, that I can't do. But I can tell you that each of the 5 patterns has a very specific language of their self-deception. And if you do brain pattern mapping and you go to your chapter in the book, when you read it, you're going to be floored, because it literally sounds like somebody crept into your brain and actually listened to all of your private thoughts. And it feels very exposing, because while we're unique, we're really only unique within our brain pattern type category.
Well, now I want to know what type I am.
I will send you my personal link so that we can do it together. But anyone can do brain pattern mapping on the website and find out what your brain pattern type is, which, if you're going to read the book, I highly suggest it, because the book, the entire, I think it's last 8 to 9 chapters, is all broken down by pattern type so that you can really use it in an index fashion and really get to work.
I love that. So it sounds like obviously we have a lot of, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of, high level leaders and entrepreneurs and people that, get burnout. Obviously, physicians fall into that category. So this can also, if they were to take this and go through, like you just said, on the website, can that help you in kind of figuring out how to not self-sabotage if you're under stress,
Yes.
different things like that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, anyone working in the medical profession, one of the very real things that many of us experience is compassion fatigue, right? It's what led us into these jobs, and then it's also what eventually can make us burn out. And some of us are burnt out and yet continue to do the job anyways. So things like compassion fatigue, overloading your plate, but also like anxiety and hypervigilance, not being able to effectively balance your work life and your home life, right? Like, I have 4 kids. People are always telling me, "Busy, like, how do you do it all?" It takes a lot of effort of doing the work like break method to make sure that I am able to leave my work at work and go home and be present with my children. And let's say that you had some sort of client emergency. Sometimes it can be challenging to go home and try to be present in your life when your mind is still ruminating on the client emergency that you just had, or maybe it's not even settled yet. So all of the tools and skills that you learn in break method help you manage all of that, from compassion fatigue to self-sabotage and productivity to relationship communication, how to actually have more empathy for people. It's not uncommon. And I think brain pattern types here, I've worked with many medical professionals. There's a high prevalence of 2 out of the 5 brain pattern types in the medical field and virtually none of the other 3. So we effectively have people that are overly giving and care oriented, and then we have those that are acutely in the present moment and very precise and very safety oriented. You don't really have any of the combination of the in between. So you tend to have more of the compassion fatigue issues, self-sabotage, overloading the plate, maybe even like chronic disease in yourself, autoimmune conditions, because eventually you can't keep over giving something's going to give out. And obviously we all know this, that can often be your body first, whether it's hormonal or autoimmune disease or otherwise. And then with the other types that are a little bit more safety oriented, control oriented, it can be challenging to just manage relationships in general, right? Like work is where you feel like you understand your world, you can thrive, you have a strong sense of identity, and then somehow it feels like any intimate relationship that you tried to participate in somehow doesn't ever go your way. These are all things that will be completely resolved with break method within 20 to 24 weeks.
Love that, and glad to hear, kind of the way that different clients can work through this. I wanted to give you the floor here as we're wrapping up here. Obviously, mental health is now, there's a lot more awareness around it, but I think, like you said in the beginning of the podcast, that innovation around it, mental health has really been lacking. So I want just hear, what your thoughts are. Any skeptics that might say, oh, hey, well, the really, to heal emotionally, it requires time, or introspection, and not data, and kind of looking at it this way. What would you say to those skeptics?
I understand why that's part of your paradigm right now, because it's been ongoing for roughly 100 years or more of building blocks to make you think that. This is what I know to be true. I have had hundreds of therapists and psychiatrists come through my work. And as soon as they get through literally that first exercise, they always look at me and they're like, why doesn't anybody else know this? Like, now that I see it, it's so obvious. Why doesn't everybody know this? And I do think, and in this, I'm oversimplifying this, but unfortunately, whichever theories get prioritized earlier, they end up kind of, it becomes a funnel, right? And really, unfortunately, a lot of academia kind of functions like a funnel. And I've run into this in a variety of ways where you risk being ostracized from your group by asking certain types of questions, and questioning predominating theories or paradigms is effectively going to lead you to either have people become skeptical of you or try to cancel you. And I do think that this is kind of built to protect the funnel. I know I had seen this one TikTok going around that is something that I had thought about before, which again oversimplified, but like, what if instead of picking Freud, we picked Adler? Like, how would, if Adler had gotten as elevated as Freud, what would our mental health paradigm look like today? And I think it would look very different. But unfortunately, this is the way that somehow schooling can kind of shape the trajectory of an entire industry, because it does create somewhat of an echo chamber, and that's one of the functions of it. And I think it's presented as a function of safeguarding. But I think once you understand how corporate money and philanthropy is used to steer what's happening inside of the academic system, it doesn't take long to see that it's actually become gatekeeping, and it does, in fact, prevent innovation, I think. I actually just did a podcast on this called Big Academia. I have a podcast called Decoded, and I go into this in depth in Big Academia. But essentially, there's so much innovation that ends up having to happen extrinsic to the system, because the system, it doesn't allow it, it actually pushes it away. Many of the more bureaucratic or red tape processes would eventually, it would slow down or stop somebody who's trying to disruptively innovate, so that they would just go then bring it into a direct to consumer brand, which is essentially what I've done, where it's like, if I can't do this effectively within the system, then I'll create it outside of the system until it becomes widely accepted. And then basically it's like you get to cut the line. That's essentially the system that we have right now. And I do think that's some of what happened with EMDR, where for a long time people looked down upon it and now it's widely accepted. So there's typically that moment where if something antagonizes the current paradigm, for many years, people will look down on it and ostracize the people that believe in it right up until everyone's adopting it. So I think I proposed some ideas in my podcast of how we could potentially speed that process up, because I do think that in all areas of medicine, that same funnel system is going to kind of slow us down. And I wish it didn't, because there are some real innovators out there. And I think when any person actually gets to experience firsthand how accurate the data scraping is that we do over these 200 questions, we can predict every single thing about this person with such a high level that I think it proves the talking about it in circles for 10 years, in fact, really only deepens those ruts. And if the client doesn't realize they're in self-deception, every time they tell the story, they're actually reaffirming that story and then they're re-encoding that memory in their body, which I believe is actually getting them further away from a healed state. So
Well said. And I think like you're, being open to innovation, new ideas, new theories, new just ways of looking at things that, have been always one way is so important. And obviously, you've had great success with it, and you've had obviously very large buy-in from everyone within your field. I know you want to take that further, obviously. So tell us, Bizzie, how can you know anyone, from someone who just wants to grab your book or go to your website, or a clinician that wants to build this into their practice, what are the next steps they should take?
So if you want to grab my book, it's on Amazon. You just type in Your Brain is a Filthy Liar. It's the only book named that, so you shouldn't have a problem finding it. It's available currently on paperback, Kindle, and hardcover. The audiobook isn't coming out until later on in the summer, but I will say, even if you're an audiobook person, you're going to want to get the physical copy because you're going to want to highlight and take notes. So even if you're going to want to use both at the same time, you're still going to want that physical copy because you're going to want to go back and reference it, especially because this book is going to teach you so much about what drives other people in your life and what their underlying motivations are that you never would have considered before. You're going to want to observe and then be like, oh my God, I have to go read this chapter. This helps me understand them so much better. So you're going to want to have that tactile experience. For those of you who are just interested in break, either as an individual, as a couple, or to take it with your family, you can just go to breakmethod.com. You can start with brain pattern mapping. You can book an advisor call, whichever way you want to go here. We've got plenty of people on our team that can answer questions about how the program works. It takes roughly 20 to 24 weeks to go from kind of that brain pattern mapping all the way through to a complete rewire. And it can be reasonably self-paced. So if someone has a really busy schedule, I've seen that take 7 or 8 months. My goal would be to make sure that they're keeping a set cadence. So instead of it being like a little bit in 1 month and then nothing for 2 months, we want to make sure that you're at least staying consistent with it, but we can extend it out however long it needs to be. If you are a clinician looking to either get certified or see if maybe the technology component is a good fit for your practice, same thing, breakmethod.com, but you're going to hit that certification tab on the top of the navigation bar. Information on all of the trainings is there. And again, if you wanted to book just an advisor call to get your questions answered about how this all works, anyone on our team will be more than happy to help you.
Well, thank you, Bizzie, for your time, for all of your innovation in mental health, and bringing forth this new method, which I think can provide so much, really relief and healing for so many people. So I want to thank you for that, and thanks for being on the Doc Lounge podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to all of our listeners. If you would like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And a big thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. If you would like to be a guest, please go to www.pacificcompanies.com. Thank you.